Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the Ranger Show. Lovely to have you with us this beautiful Wednesday afternoon in South Africa. My name's Russell Gerber, of course with you for the next half an hour, chatting about all the things we see on the cameras. If we're lucky enough to get some good action on the live cameras, we'll also go through a couple of our highlights from the last few days. A little bit of a twist today. Focus on particular group of animals, but yeah, we've got some fun stuff lined up for you. As always, if you've got any questions or anything on your mind, please feel free to send through those questions in the question box below your picture, and I'll do my best to get to them during the show. And kicking off the show today at Tau, where things are looking pretty quiet. There are some clouds hanging around that have been around the last few days, and that often does move the animals away from the water holes when they start expecting rain. And you often then see the bigger mammal species moving off into other regions. As you can tell, there's really not a lot available in the way of grazing or shrubs for the browsers. And so if they can get away from this area, they'll do so as much as possible, move into areas where there is the potential for some better feeding. As many of you will know, of course, this is a difficult time of year for the herbivores, often a time of great plenty for the predators. So it all works in cycles. For the time being, it is a predator's world out there. And a quick hello to Sally S. Hello, Sally. Thanks for joining us. Anyone else out there, please feel free to give us a shout out and say hi. Ah, Sicko, good to have you with us as well. I know you often miss the shows, but it's good to have you with us live. And as I said, a slightly different show today with our highlights. We're focusing on a specific group of animals. And today we're going to be going with a little focus on the mongoose family. Actually all part of the carnivora order. They are of course all carnivores. And all in the family Herpestidae. And there we got one of our crocodiles shaking up the water with his tail. Not just doing that for practicing his dance moves, but indeed trying to scare up any potential fish or aquatic species that he might be able to catch whilst disturbing with his feet and tail. Many of the freshwater fish species in these regions will dig themselves into the mud a little just below the surface. And this technique can help to scare them out of hiding, and then the crocodile quickly grabs them as they move or attempt to move away. Pretty effective hunting technique. One of the most interesting things I've seen in recent times was a similar hunting technique used by dolphins. Some of you might have seen that in a wonderful program on Netflix. I think it was called Planet Earth or Our World, something like that. But the one that was on Netflix and actually narrated by Sir David Attenborough a man I'm constantly trying to imitate, doing a dead average job, I suspect, but I'll keep striving. But yeah, the dolphins in that particular clip utilizing a similar technique, but in fact swimming in circles and using their fluke or tail to disturb the mud in a circle around the group of fish they were hunting, and in so confusing the fish, forcing them to take to the air and actually snapping those fish out of the air. Now, crocodiles can also snatch fish out of the air if the need requires, but I haven't seen it happen on the cameras, but we never know. We never know. But a really lovely clip that you can see, as I mentioned, on that show, if you're interested in those sorts of things. And hello to Fike. Excellent to have you with us. Suki back again. Lovely to have you with us. Some of our oldest fans and members out there. Always great to have you guys and gals with us. And I think for today, let's dive straight into our first little highlight for you today. As I said, the focus today is going to be on this group of animals, of course, the mongoose. Now, this little clip was taken from one of our new cameras around Campus Dam, and this is a yellow mongoose. You can see it running off, and obviously it's pretty bright light, so you can't see that yellow color as well in this particular shot, but they do have a fairly yellow tinged fur, almost a reddish yellow or tawny yellow in some cases. Up towards Botswana and around the sort of Tau region, you sometimes get them also a more grey color, so try not to use coloration alone to identify species. And there you go, just a short little clip of yellow mongoose. And a particular species that is, of course, endemic to southern Africa. And they tend to prefer open habitats, short grassland, semi-desert, scrub, things like that. But even along the coastline, they don't tend to prefer too much action in terms of the forest or dense vegetation, and like so many animals, also avoid the Namibian coastline, which is very dry and difficult to deal with. What's interesting about that particular species is that they are diurnal as well. They spend most of their time active during the day. And also, like many mongoose species, they actually use little latrines, often close to the entrances of their burrow. And we have a little warthog in an afternoon bath. Looks like a good place to be in the bush right now. Of course, things starting to warm up, as you would imagine. Many of your mammalian species will often spend this time of day trying to keep themselves cool. Of course, warthog, a huge proponent of cooling themselves in the water. covering themselves in mud and keeping themselves cool. Everyone very lazy in the warm afternoon sun this afternoon. I think for now, let's go right into our next little highlight then. Sticking with our mongoose family. The herpistids. Here you can see another one of our famous species, which is of course the slender mongoose. Quite commonly seen around Cat Eye, where this one was shot. As I mentioned, all of these are carnivorous species, often going for things like small mammals, lizards, and of course well known for taking on snakes. Slender mongoose, as the name suggests, has got quite a slender body. You can see often has a lovely black tip at the end of the tail. This is an easier way to identify them. But again, quite varied in terms of their coloration in particular. And then probably the most widespread species in southern Africa. They're mainly terrestrial too. They do climb trees but spend a lot of their time on the ground. Usually solitary, but sometimes in pairs. The yellow mongoose actually do form little colonies with a dominant male. But most of the time when you see them, you'll see them on their own. And the same goes for the slender mongoose. Back live now, of course, with our grey heron. Once again, with the mongoose, within their territories, those slender mongoose, they'll have several little midden sites, places where they will actually defecate and urinate. So often you'll find these little telltale signs when you're out in the wild. That leads us to our little quiz question for you today. Let's see how sharp we are out there in the southern African region. How many different species of mongoose do we have? How many different species of mongoose? Let's see what your thoughts are on that. Our crocodile's still working hard. You can see that grey heron attempting to sneak in and potentially steal whatever the crocodile scares up. Doesn't look like he's had much luck so far. Well, let's go to one of our next clips. Again, probably one of the more commonly seen species and one of the few truly gregarious species of mongoose. And I know many of you would have seen them a few times, often around Rosie's. And they make that very cute little call to each other. Basically just a way of locating each other. You'll often hear the youngsters making a similar kind of sound, essentially begging for food. While the troop is out looking for food, they of course mostly looking for invertebrates, digging into the ground, trying to find little beetles and grubs. And very often they will actually leave a big grub for the youngsters if there are very young ones in the group out foraging with them. group that is really, really cute to watch. A very tight-knit community, the banded mongoose. Of course, pretty distinctive with those stripes down their back. So very hard to confuse them with anything else, really. In many ways, a lot of similar behaviors and social structure to the suricates or meerkats. As I said, a little group that we often see on the Rosie's cam. I haven't seen them recently, but I suspect there's just not much food around at the moment. And again, banded mongoose tend to be more diurnal. Troop numbers can be anywhere from around 5 up to 30 sometimes, even more in some groups. As I said, those little soft calls are just contact calls to keep them all close together, let everyone know where they are. And Sally asks, is there a alpha pair in all mongoose families? No, Sally, only in the ones where you have strict hierarchical structure. Otherwise, they'll often be in pairs on their own, have babies and separate for a time and then come back together again, particularly the more solitary species like the slender mongoose and yellow mongoose that we spoke about. Sorry, not the yellow mongoose, the slender mongoose, and then later on we'll come to another one, the white-tailed mongoose. But a great question. And Sally also says she reckons 3 species of mongoose. Suki's gone all in at 14. So we'll get to the answer a little later on. And Sally, you also asked about, as the waterholes dry up, what do the catfish do when burrowing themselves in the mud? And how long can they remain there until the next rains? Yeah, Sally, it's very interesting, that behavior. Some of the species can indeed estivate, as we refer to it. It's a form of hibernation. And some of the amphibian species here in Africa can do the same, where they'll actually dig underground underneath these water sources and almost create a damp cocoon, slow down their metabolic systems and metabolic rates, and in that way keep themselves protected in a small little mud encasement for sometimes months at a time. There's even record of in some cases it being years, where areas haven't seen any rain or water, and suddenly the skies open up and those areas are in flood again, and lo and behold, there are some catfish species in those isolated water holes. So it really is a remarkable adaptation for living in the drought. It's something quite unique to particularly the catfish species. Again, another great question. Thanks, Sally. We got a couple of answers to our questions. 5 species. All good answers. But for now, for those of you who've gone with 3, Sally, I'm afraid it's not 3, because we're now going to show you a 4th species of mongoose at our next little highlight. And this one, of course, one we tend to see on the nighttime cameras, certainly more active nocturnally. And this is, of course, the white-tailed mongoose. It's a very large mongoose compared to the others. Obviously, the white tail on the end is pretty indicative of this particular species. It tends to have a slightly darker body, as you can see. Some individuals can have a black tail as well, I'm told. I've never actually seen that, but it does tend to have a white tail, as the name would suggest. But again, many of you would have seen that particular species around fairly often. And that species in particular prefers the eastern and northeastern parts of the Southern Africa region. They're not too fond of the drier, more arid regions like the yellow mongoose, and certainly the slender or banded that tend to be more adaptive in more environments. White-tailed mongoose tend to prefer areas with lots of water. And occasionally you'll find them in drier areas, but only in areas where there is a permanent water source. But yeah, as I said, one of the bigger mongooses, the white-tailed mongoose, in our region. Of course, we're back live now at Rosie's, and interestingly, I've actually seen one of the most interesting sightings I ever saw in the wild was a leopard actually hunting and catching a white-tailed mongoose. Now, it's a fairly unusual prey for leopard, a little bit more risky and quite difficult too, but of course many of our predatory cats are opportunistic. Whatever comes across their path, if they are hungry and in the right mood, they will take down most species. But yeah, I'd never really seen that before. I'd never seen a leopard taking a mongoose at all until that particular sighting. That was a few years ago, but a really interesting one nonetheless. And that mongoose fought tooth and nail. But of course the leopard much bigger, much more powerful. Otherwise, right now on the cameras, just our Egyptian geese hanging around and foraging. And we got another answer, at least 7. Susie asks, is the white-tailed mongoose the largest mongoose in the region? Susie, as far as I know, yes, it is indeed the largest mongoose species we have. I think the only other one that would compete would be the marsh or water mongoose. But I'll have to check that out for you. I think it's between those two, certainly. And then another question, have you seen the TikTok video doing the rounds of a mongoose playing possum with the hornbill? No, I haven't seen that. I'll definitely see if I can find it. That sounds like something I need to watch. And then let's go into our last video of the day, and the last species we have for you on the cameras. This, of course, being our 5th species and another one of our gregarious stars on the cameras, ones that we see fairly often. And this, of course, the smallest of the group. The dwarf mongoose. And once again, a really gregarious particular group, the dwarf mongoose. You always find them in troops, So where there's one, there'll be more. But what is interesting about them that I always find so interesting, this is the smallest carnivore in the region in southern Africa. And able to take on prey species significantly bigger than themselves, often fighting out of their weight class. Really a pretty impressive little species. These mongoose also tend to avoid the drier areas. You often see them around rocky areas, grassland, savanna, and open woodland, areas like that. But anywhere that's too semi-desert or arid, we don't tend to see them too often. And yet another diurnal mongoose, of course. These little guys also tend to have a fixed home range. And one of the homes you often find associated with mongoose, the banded mongoose, dwarf mongoose as well, they do like to use abandoned termite mounds or termitaria for their dens. And yet another group that has a very rigid social system, dominant male and female as we spoke about, or an alpha male and female. And then below that, a strict hierarchy below that. But of course, back live now. Checking out if there's any other visitors that have arrived during the show. All seems pretty quiet at the moment. A couple of guinea fowl around. But all looking very dry. It's a tough time out there for the animals. But I think it's around that time. For those of you who've given me your answers, thank you for our quiz today. The question today, of course, was how many mongoose species are there in the southern African region? And we're going to stick with just true species today. I don't want any subspecies arguments now. But thank you all for your cooperation. We've got at least 7, we've got 5, we had 3, we had 14. And we have one winner, and it is indeed Suki who nailed it. There are indeed 14 recognized mongoose species in the southern African region. So well done, Suki. It is an amazing number. And for those of you who are interested, we can go through who they are for you quickly. Looks like we got a little brown-hooded kingfisher. But let's go through those species for you quickly. So we've got banded mongoose, we have Ansorg's Kusamanzi, we've got Miller's mongoose, we've got bushy-tailed mongoose, we have Salu's mongoose, the small grey mongoose or Cape mongoose, the Kwokaland slender mongoose, the slender mongoose itself, black mongoose in Namibia, the large grey mongoose, the water mongoose, dwarf mongoose, white-tailed mongoose, yellow mongoose. And that is it. So well done to you, Soki. That's a impressive mongoose knowledge. I'm sure you constantly impress your friends at dinner parties with your mongoose knowledge, just like I do. But well done to all of you for taking part today, and unfortunately that's all we have time for on the show as we hang out with our little kingfisher. So thanks once again everyone for joining us. Always fun hanging out in the wild with you on the cameras. A little quiet today, but you never know what might come around. But in the meantime, have a great week. Enjoy the rest of your week and weekend coming. Keep an eye on the cameras. See what we might get. You never know what might come down, as you all are very well aware. Please do consider becoming part of the premium group, the premium subscriber, giving you access to our new cameras, and of course giving us the opportunity to get new cameras into new areas all over the African continent. And if you'd like to follow me on social media, you'll find me at Russ the Ranger on Instagram. But for now, that's about it from all of us in the Africam team. Thank you so much once again, and we will see you all again next week. Cheers for now.